Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something that I think a lot of people struggle with, and it can be a really tricky thing to kind of pin down and understand, and that's the imposter phenomenon,
Yeah.
which a lot of people know as imposter syndrome.
Mm.
Have you ever felt like you're kind of a fraud, even when you're doing well?
Oh, yeah,
Like you're just
yeah.
waiting to be found out?
All the time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, you've brought in a really cool stack of research on this.
I have.
And so we're going to kind of help you unpack all this, and hopefully all of our listeners can learn something new today.
That sounds great.
Awesome. So to kick things off, how about you give us a little bit of background on this imposter phenomenon? Like, when did this idea even come about?
Yeah, so it's a pretty common experience, and it's been studied a ton since the late 1970s.
Oh, wow.
And the term imposter phenomenon was actually coined by a couple of psychologists, Pauline Rose-Clance and Suzanne Ahmed-Imes, in their big 1978 study.
1978, huh?
Yeah.
That's a while back.
Yeah.
Okay, so, like, what exactly is the imposter phenomenon?
So at its core, it's that feeling of being a phony,
Hmm.
an intellectual fraud, despite all the evidence of your accomplishments. So you might have an amazing track record, but you still feel like you don't really deserve any of your success.
Right.
And you're constantly just afraid of being found out,
Right.
just like faking it till you make it,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
And it's not just a fleeting thought, right? Like, this is
Mhm.
something that can really stick with you and really impact your life in different ways.
Absolutely. Research has shown that imposter phenomenon is linked to a bunch of different negative emotions and behaviors like anxiety, depression,
Oh, wow.
low self-esteem, fear of failure, and it can even lead to self-sabotaging behaviors like procrastinating or setting like really unrealistic goals.
Oh, man. See, that's what I'm talking about. Like, this really can be pretty intense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, like, what causes this? Is
Mhm.
it just something we're born with?
I wish it were that easy. There's no single imposter gene or anything like that.
Right.
But research suggests that certain early life experiences, especially within the family, can play a huge role.
Oh.
In their 1978 study, Clance and Imes found two specific family dynamics that were super common in the high-achieving women that they studied.
Okay, so let's dive into those a little bit because I
Yeah.
think, everyone's interested in, like, how our upbringing can really shape how we see ourselves as adults and how we, view our successes and failures.
Totally.
Yeah.
So one dynamic they found was families where one child was labeled as intelligent and another child was labeled as sensitive.
So even if that sensitive child is actually really academically successful, they might still have that feeling like they're just not as smart as their sibling.
Yeah, exactly. They constantly compare themselves and end up feeling like they don't quite measure up.
Right.
And, there was a really interesting example from their research of this woman who was amazing at spelling,
Mm-hmm.
and she would consistently get these great grades in school, but she was terrified of spelling bees
Oh, wow.
because her family always saw her brother as the smart one. So she would actually pretend to be sick to avoid the spelling bees.
Oh, wow.
Like, that's a classic example of how these labels can just become self-fulfilling prophecies,
Yeah.
even when they're not based in reality at all.
That's wild. It really goes to show you just how powerful that family dynamic is.
Yeah.
So what about that other dynamic that they found?
So the other dynamic is families where you have the bright child who's constantly getting praise for absolutely everything they do.
So you'd think that constant praise would lead to, tons of confidence.
You'd think, right?
Yeah.
But it can actually do the exact opposite.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so counterintuitive.
I know, right? It is, but when you grow up with all that praise, it sets up this, like, impossible standard to keep up. And eventually you hit these challenges that actually take some real effort. And then the imposter feelings start to creep in because you're like, wait a second, I actually have to try now.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not as smart as everyone thinks I am.
It's like you're almost set up for self-sabotage in a way. Like you're so used to things coming easily that when you actually have to struggle with something, you assume it's you and not the situation.
Yeah, it's almost like a defense mechanism.
Wow. It makes you wonder how many talented people out there are holding themselves back because of this.
It's a huge issue, and it leads to this thing called self-handicapping, which we can get into a little bit later.
Okay.
But these family dynamics are really the foundation for understanding how those feelings of inadequacy can start.
So I guess what we're really seeing here is what we learn about ourselves when we're young can really have a lasting impact on how we see ourselves as adults.
Totally. It's not just about intelligence or talent.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the messages we internalize about whether we're even worthy of success.
It's so much more than just, what grades we got or, whatever talents we had as a kid.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow. This has already given me a lot to think about.
Me too.
So just to recap, we've learned about the definition of the imposter phenomena. We've seen how it can impact us emotionally and behaviorally.
Yeah.
And we've even started to look at its roots in early family dynamics.
Right.
So where do we go from here? What else do we need to know about this?
So next, I think it would be good to dig into some of the specific behaviors associated with the imposter phenomenon, things like self-handicapping.
Okay, yeah.
This is where it gets really interesting because it shows how these feelings can actually influence our actions.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack self-handicapping because I have a feeling this is going to be a really insightful part of the deep dive.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
All right, so
Let's get into it.
self-handicapping, it's basically like you're creating obstacles for yourself, almost like to protect your ego. So it's a way to avoid fully investing in something so that if you fail, you've got a built-in excuse.
So it's kind of like saying, well, I didn't do well because I didn't really try, instead of, I'm not actually capable of doing this.
Exactly. You're setting yourself up to be the underdog.
Right, right.
In your own story.
Yeah.
So think about those classic examples. Procrastinating on a big project, not studying enough for that exam, even setting these crazy high goals that you know you can't reach.
Right.
These are all ways of kind of creating a situation where if you do succeed,
Right.
it's even more impressive.
Because you've overcome all these things.
Exactly.
Yeah. But wouldn't that be kind of exhausting, though?
Oh, totally.
To constantly be trying to outperform the obstacles that you're putting in front of yourself.
Absolutely. And that's what leads to that vicious cycle.
Right.
The more you self-handicap, the more it reinforces those feelings that you're not good enough.
Right.
And then that leads to more self-sabotage. And
So it just keeps going and going and going.
it just keeps going, yeah. It can be really hard to break free.
I can see how all this really ties back to what we were talking about with, those family dynamics.
Absolutely.
If you're always looking for validation from other people or you're afraid of not living up to expectations, self-handicapping almost seems like, a way to protect yourself.
Totally. And there's actually research to back that up.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So there was this study in 2006 by Julie Want and Sabina Kleitman.
Okay.
And they found this link between certain parenting styles and both imposter phenomenon and self-handicapping.
Okay.
But here's the interesting thing. They found that paternal overprotection and like a lack of care from the father were really strongly linked to higher imposter scores.
So you're saying that a father's behavior can actually play a part in these feelings of self-doubt
Yeah.
and this tendency to self-sabotage.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Like, why do you think that is?
So it could have something to do with attachment theory.
Okay.
Even with the best intentions, overprotective fathers might actually be preventing their kids from developing that sense of competence. That comes from figuring things out on your own.
So if dad's always coming in and fixing everything,
Yeah.
you never really get that chance to, learn how to deal with challenges yourself.
Exactly. So these kids grow up feeling like they need constant reassurance from other people because they never got the opportunity to build that self-belief from within.
So it's almost like they're always looking for someone else to tell them that they're doing okay.
And that lack of self-confidence is a key part of the imposter phenomenon. Remember, it's not about your actual abilities. It's about how you see yourself.
How you perceive yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You could be like super brilliant objectively.
Right.
But if you don't actually believe in yourself, those imposter feelings are going to take over.
That self-doubt is going to creep in.
Totally.
So there's that disconnect between how we see ourselves and, the reality.
There is. And in the Want and Kleitman study, they actually measured that disconnect objectively. Yeah, they used this cognitive test called the esoteric analogies test.
Okay.
And after each question, the participants had to rate how confident they were in their answer.
Okay.
And what they found was people with higher imposter phenomenon scores consistently gave themselves lower confidence ratings.
Even if they were getting the answers right.
Even if they were getting the answers right.
Wow. That's creepy.
Yeah, their actual performance on the test wasn't affected.
So you could be acing this test and still feel like you're just totally guessing.
Exactly.
That's got to be a really tough place to be.
It is, and it's a major part of imposter phenomenon, that gap between how you see yourself and what you're actually capable of. So you might be achieving all these amazing things, but inside you feel like a total fraud.
Just waiting to be found out.
Yeah, just waiting to be found out.
It makes me think about all the times that I've downplay my own achievements or like brushed off compliments from people.
Right.
And maybe that wasn't just me being humble. Maybe it was a sign of something a little bit deeper.
It's definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
We often carry these messages from our past experiences,
Right.
and they can stick with us even when we're adults.
It's so interesting how much our childhood can really impact how we see ourselves.
It really is.
So just to recap this part of the deep dive,
Yeah.
we've explored the behaviors that can come from the imposter phenomenon, specifically self-handicapping.
Right.
And now we're starting to see how it can really impact our self-confidence.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that kind of plays into all of this?
There's one more big one, and that is perfectionism.
Okay. Perfectionism.
Yeah. So a study in 2019 by Wang, Shevaleva, and Permyakova
Okay.
found a really strong connection between imposter phenomenon and what they call perfectionistic discrepancy.
What is perfectionistic discrepancy?
So it's basically that tendency to focus on your shortcomings.
Okay.
That gap between how you think you're doing and your, like, sky-high standards.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just about having high standards,
Right.
which can be a good thing.
Right, of course.
It's about constantly feeling like you're not measuring up.
Even when you are.
Even when you are.
Wow.
So imagine a student who gets a 95% on a test,
Okay.
but they just focus on those 5 points that they missed.
Wow.
That's perfectionistic discrepancy at play.
Oh, okay.
It's that constant self-criticism that just fuels those feelings of not being good enough.
It's like you're setting yourself up to fail
You are.
because you can't ever be perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that perfectionism isn't just about trying to be excellent.
Mm.
It often comes from a fear of failure, needing that validation from others,
Okay.
and this deep-seated belief that your worth is tied to what you achieve.
Wow. This deep dive is really eye-opening.
I know, right?
We've talked about where imposter feelings come from,
Yeah.
the things we do because of them,
Mm-hmm.
and now how it affects how we see ourselves.
Yeah.
It's clear this is a complicated thing
It is.
with deep roots and big consequences.
Yeah,
But is there hope? Like, can we actually overcome these feelings?
absolutely.
Okay.
Just because you feel this way doesn't mean you're stuck with self-doubt forever.
Okay.
There are things you can do to change how you think about these things.
Right.
And develop some healthier ways to cope.
Okay, good. So let's talk about those.
Yeah.
Let's dive into, how can we turn this imposter syndrome
Yeah.
into something that can actually help us?
Yeah, let's do it. So we've been talking a lot about, like, all the downsides,
Yeah.
of feeling like an imposter.
Right.
But there's another side to this,
Yeah, okay.
like a different perspective.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that kind of challenges this idea that it's always a bad thing.
Okay, so you're saying there might actually be like a positive side
Yeah.
to feeling like an imposter.
Maybe.
I got to hear this. Tell me more.
All right, so in this article from 2021, Dr. Melanie V. Tucker,
Okay.
she talks about rewriting the narrative on imposter syndrome. And she says that instead of always thinking about these feelings as a weakness,
Mm-hmm.
maybe we should look at them as a potential strength.
So like those feelings of not being good enough
Yeah.
could actually be helpful.
Yeah, think about it. People who struggle with imposter feelings,
Okay.
they tend to over-prepare.
Mm-hmm.
They work harder,
Right.
and they're always trying to get better.
Right.
They're driven by that fear,
Yeah.
of being found out. So
Yeah.
they push themselves to prove themselves.
So instead of letting self-doubt like stop them in their tracks,
Right.
they use it as fuel.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's channeling that anxiety into action.
Right.
Dr. Tucker also talks about how important it is to look at fear of failure as a chance for success.
Interesting.
Well, instead of shying away from challenges,
Right. Yeah.
you go for it.
Yeah.
Knowing that even if you don't get it perfect,
Yeah.
you'll still learn and grow along the way.
I like that. It's like shifting your mindset from I can't do this to I'm going to figure this out even if it's hard.
Totally. It's all about the journey, even
Yeah.
with the bumps along the road.
And, it even makes me think differently about those self-handicapping behaviors we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Like, wait, so are you saying that procrastinating or setting those crazy high goals could be a good thing?
Not always, of course.
Right.
But sometimes those behaviors can actually come from wanting to do something really amazing. Think about it.
Okay.
If you procrastinate, but then you still kill it,
Right.
it makes your win even bigger.
Because you overcame all those hurdles that you put in your own way.
Exactly. It's like a weird version of shooting for the stars.
Okay.
Obviously, it's not healthy long term,
Right.
but understanding that motivation can help you redirect that energy.
Right. Use it in a better way.
Yeah. Instead of setting yourself up to fail, you can focus on goals that are ambitious but still doable
Okay.
and develop some healthier habits
Right.
to cope with the pressure.
So what about perfectionism? Can we spin that in a positive light too?
Totally. It's all about shifting the focus from beating yourself up to getting better.
Oh.
So instead of dwelling on your mistakes,
Yeah.
you see them as opportunities to learn and grow.
It's like that whole growth mindset thing.
Exactly. Remember perfectionistic discrepancy?
Yeah.
Well, imagine using that tendency to focus on the gap, to
Oh.
fuel your love of learning.
So you're always trying to improve and learn new things.
Exactly. You're never going to be perfect,
Right.
but you can always be getting better.
It's like that saying, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Ah, I like that.
Maybe those imposter feelings are just a sign that you're with people who push you
Yeah, that's a great point.
to be your best.
It's all about embracing that discomfort that comes with growth
Right.
and realizing that those feelings of inadequacy,
Yeah.
they might actually be guiding you towards something amazing.
This has been so fascinating. We went from feeling like imposters ourselves
Yeah.
to realizing maybe there's some good in it.
I know. It's wild.
It's incredible how just changing your perspective can totally change how you see things.
It really is.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave everyone with one last thought.
Okay.
We talked about where these feelings come from,
Yeah.
the things we do because of them, and even how they might actually be helpful in some ways.
Right.
But the real key here is understanding what you tell yourself.
Yeah, that's so true.
Like, what's your own story?
Your own narrative.
Exactly.
What have you learned about success, about failure,
Yeah.
and about what you're worth?
Where did those ideas come from?
Yeah, and how are they shaping how you see yourself right now?
Those are some really powerful questions for all of us to think about.
They are?
When you take the time to really examine your own story, you might be surprised by what you find.
And you might even find that those imposter feelings are actually leading you down a path that's just for you.
That's a great way to put it. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the imposter phenomenon.
Absolutely. This was fun.
We'll see you all next time for another deep dive into something new.